You know, Prohibition didn't start the Mafia. There was a Mafia and there were organized crime groups before Prohibition, but bootlegging really brought in so much money that that was kind of you know, it's like a startup company going to raise venture capital. That was the venture capital that these organizations needed to expand their operations, to control larger territories, to pay off the police, to pay off judges, pay off politicians. And that was as true here in Tampa as it was in Chicago or New York or Boston during that time period. In Tampa in the 1920s, the dominant organized crime boss, the first real boss of the underworld in Tampa, he wasn't an Italian mafioso. He was actually a local homegrown guy named Charlie Wall. He came from a very prominent, very well-to-do family. His father was a very well-renowned physician, but he passed away, and then Charlie decided to go a little bit of a different path in life, and he began hanging out in the opium dens in Fort Brooke area of Tampa. And by the 1920s, he had started getting involved in bootlegging, prostitution, narcotics. He was actually a morphine addict as well as a narcotics trafficker. But he also was able, because of the money he was making and his family's connections to the power and the elite of downtown Tampa, to pay off the politicians, pay off the judges, and he controlled the elections here. In fact, there were times that the governor called in the National Guard to oversee city elections because they were so corrupt here during that time period. And Charlie Wall was the first guy to kind of bring a little core group of gangsters around him. And you know, it's kind of interesting. Florida, especially Tampa in the 1920s, was very much the Deep South. There were a lot of lynchings of Italians and Cubans as well as African Americans. And Charlie, you know, maybe been a little progressive on the criminal front, had a kind of a multi-ethnic crew of guys that were around him. So by the late 1920s, he's running almost everything. But at the same time, you do have an endemic Sicilian mafia group here that comes over from Sicily, and you start seeing the emergence of a cohesive organized crime group. And by 1928, 1929, there is a young mafia group here in Tampa, and they start a lack of a better descriptor, a war with Charlie Wall for control of the rackets. Well, from 1930 to about 1940 is kind of the first war between these mafia groups, and this whole kind of era from 1930 to about 1959 is referred to as the era of blood, because there's these gangland killings in Ybor City in Tampa. Some people go missing. There's a lot of attempted shootings. It's open warfare. In fact, Tampa is nicknamed Little Chicago. Although unlike Chicago, where you have the that archetypal Tommy gun, trench coat wearing, Tommy gun wielding 20s gangster, the weapon of choice down here far and away was a sawed-off double-barrel shotgun. But you had back and forth killings of mafia guys and then Charlie Wall's guys. In fact, during the 1930s, Charlie Wall himself was the victim of 3 attempted assassinations hits. But in 1940, the head of the mafia at that time, Ignazio Antinori, is shot and killed. And Charlie Wall's kind of a little weak, and there's a little bit of a power vacuum, and into that steps a mafia figure named Santo Trafficante Sr., and he basically, Charlie Wall later testifies, he kind of gets pushed out of the rackets, and Santo Trafficante Sr. and later his son Santo Jr. take the remnants of Charlie Wall's group and kind of get everyone together and become the dominant organized crime group here in Tampa.